It's no secret at this point that I'm a big Sonic fan. Been playing the games my whole life, and for the past few years, I've dedicated a good amount of time to understanding the lore of the franchise, leading me down rabbit holes and coming out of them with a better appreciation for certain games. One of these games is Sonic Adventure 2. Sonic Adventure 2 has been a game that I've honestly never really liked even as a kid. I remember getting my friend to lend me his copy because I never played the story mode. I have vivid memories of not enjoying what I played for the most part, and I was pretty disappointed. I was big into SA1 as a kid too, and always preferred that game over SA2. Even now, I continue to gush over SA1 and give SA2 the side eye. However, since I've taken time to become more knowledgeable about Sonic lore, I found myself genuinely wanting to play this game again, and I did, so let's talk about it. We'll go over this game as if I'm reviewing it, so let's start with the story. Eggman frees Shadow from Prison Island, owned and controlled by the Guardian of United Nations, Gun. Shadow tells the scientists to gather the 7 emeralds and bring them to the Space Colony Ark, a massive space colony floating in Earth's orbit created by Dr. Eggman's grandfather, Professor Gerald. In an act of racial profiling, Gun arrests Sonic and the Blue Hedgehog escapes but is soon arrested again after encountering Shadow. Knuckles fends off Rouge, a Gun spy who also loves treasure hunting, from trying to steal the Master Emerald by breaking it apart when Eggman tries to steal it. Eggman and Shadow enlist Rouge's help, and the three head back to Prison Island, stealing emeralds and literally committing an act of terrorism by destroying the island in a massive explosion. Tails and Amy free Sonic before the island blows up. From here on, it's a mad dash between the heroes and villains to collect the 7 emeralds and the Master Emerald shards. The heroes aim to stop Eggman and Shadow from destroying Earth. After one final showdown, Sonic beats Shadow, yes that's canon, and uses a fake yellow emerald made by Tails to stop the Eclipse cannon from firing. This causes the Biolizard to emerge, take control of the Ark, and full send towards Earth. Sonic and the gang see footage of Professor Gerald's final moments, recounting his descent into madness before being killed by way of firing squad. The group head off to stop the Biolizard. Shadow realizes his real promise to Maria, Gerald's granddaughter who was killed on the Ark, and makes the ultimate sacrifice. In an emotional scene, the rest of the group briefly mourns Shadow's death before leaving the space colony. Sonic stories catch flack for being too convoluted, but I found SA2's story to be much better and easier to follow than I previously thought. It's not nearly as edgy as I've often heard and described it to be for years. I will say though, things like a child being killed and her grandfather also being murdered by the government is a bit much. I'm all for serious stories with Sonic, and we've seen many great examples of this being done. Even SA1's implication of perfect chaos wiping out an entire group of people didn't feel as extreme. But maybe that's just me. Aside from that, this story, like I said, is really good. I see why people love SA2 Shadow so much. I said this in the video I previously made about him. Shadow's character has a certain flair. It's a nice parallel to Sonic, which I think is interesting, as the two are often seen as polar opposites, and in some ways they are, but Shadow is much closer to Sonic as a character, or at least I think he was, especially in the first few games he was featured in. The rest of the story holds up decently enough on its own, with the cat and mouse games between Rouge and Knuckles, Tails reaffirming his belief in himself, and the classic Sonic vs. Eggman storyline. Shadow's inclusion keeps the story moving at a brisk pace that perfectly captures the desperation of Sonic's team to stop Eggman's gang, and eventually the Biolizard. Shadow keeps Sonic on his toes. Their dynamic in this game is great right up until the very end. The bitter enemies turned respected rivals is a relationship I wish Sonic Media was better at exploring. Hope we get more of this kind of stuff between Sonic and Shadow in the future. I don't have too much to say about the music of this game that hasn't already been said. I praise SA1 for its musical diversity, having a defined sound through many different genres. SA2 manages to do the same. For a long time, I've been dismissive of SA2's OST, but it's really good and it always has been. From its fast-paced rock to hip-hop, jazz, drum and bass, this soundtrack goes. I love that Shadow, Knuckles, and Rouge specifically have defined soundtracks, while Sonic, Tails, and Eggman stick to a more rock-based sound. The sound design is terrible though. The music is too low, and then the sound effects are insanely loud, especially in mech stages. Was it always like this? The visuals have aged quite a bit, but the game still looks good. This shot of Shadow at the end of the game is beautiful. Sonic Team was in their bag with that one. I also love the way the menus look in this game. Now for the part I'm sure you're all excited for, the gameplay. As most of you know, there are 3 distinct gameplay styles in SA2, the standard adventure-era gameplay known as action stages with Sonic and Shadow, treasure hunting with Knux and Rouge, and mech gameplay taken from Gamma and SA1 with Tails and Eggman. Each group gets around 9 stages. Let's start with the action stages. Sonic and Shadow stages don't differ much from the SA1 stages. The controls for both characters is more tight instead of floaty like in SA1. This, along with the linear level design of most stages, highlights the fast-paced action. For a long time, I've been a staunch, linear bad kind of guy when it comes to Sonic games, but I've come to not hate the SA2 stages as much as I used to. I'm still not a big fan of City Escape, for example, but I understand its appeal, especially from a narrative standpoint. In stark contrast to City Escape, I love Final Rush. It's the action stage between both Sonic and Shadow that features what I love most about Sonic stages. It's big with a myriad of pathways that don't all feel like shortcuts. Sonic Team, once again, in their bag. I find Shadow stages to be overall more enjoyable. Radical Highway is a beast level and Final Chase is just as good as Final Rush is. My only problems are no instant spin dash, but that's fixed with mods. The homing attack just doesn't work sometimes for some reason, and don't get me started on that whole one action button for many different moves thing. Yuji Naka should be rested again just for this. If you haven't noticed already, I'm using a few mods, mainly pertaining to controls just to make playing these speed stages feel better. Speaking of mods, that brings me to the treasure hunting stages. Yes, I'm using one that makes all 3 items trackable at the same time. I've seen people defend the shift from 3 trackable items at a time to only having 1 at a time, but no matter how much you want to spin it, it's not good. Having all 3 trackable at the same time doesn't discourage exploration. These maps are huge. It still takes me a bit of time to explore anyway. Locking it to 1 at a time is just unnecessarily extending gameplay time. Despite my problem with the treasure hunting stages, I do enjoy exploring them. They all vary in scale, which I appreciate, and the music is good. Around every stage are these floating screens that offer suggestions about where the next item piece is. This encourages remembering certain aspects of the level, which is a pretty cool idea. I like Meteor Herd. I'm a fan of scaling large structures and platformers, so it's a fun stage for me. Mad Space kinda sucks though, but that's mostly because they decide to give you the hints backwards. A very weird gimmick if you don't have a mirror with you. I don't know if this is some sort of placebo effect, but I feel like Knux and Rouge are a bit looser and floatier than Sonic and Shadow are. Maybe it only feels this way because they're slower. I actually like how Knuckles and Rouge control most in the game. They have the best movement of all 3 classes in my opinion. While we're on the subject of movement, let's take a look at the mech stages. These are probably the worst in the game in my opinion. I have no problem controlling the mechs, they have decent speed, and even though they're clunky, because the controls are tighter, they're not too hard to maneuver. The part of their levels that sucks is the enemy placement. Too many times in these stages you'll be blindsided by an enemy unless you somehow have the inclination to wait a few seconds before they rain down on you. I don't understand why this is a constant thing in these stages. It would be equal to slicers being in every other level in Sonic 2. It's just annoying, and I don't understand why it happens so much in these levels specifically. It doesn't make the stages any more difficult. When Sonic Team isn't getting you with cheap enemy placement though, these levels are pretty fun to play through. I particularly enjoy Mission Street and Cosmic Wall. The overall gameplay in SA2 is good. Unfortunately, there's one thing, whether it's awful button mapping to unnecessary elements in stage gimmicks and level design, that hamper some of the experience. It's a very fun time outside of that stuff. I'm not going to talk about mission mode, never cared for that stuff in Sonic games. I prefer how Sonic Frontiers handled it, where you do a run and complete objectives within said run to gain whatever rewards. It's a more streamlined experience for me. A ranking every mission in this game gets you an exclusive 3D version of Green Hill, so that's nice at least. I know this is a controversial take, so let me take the time to say that I like the Chao Garden, and when I'm into it enough, I have a fun time raising the little aliens. However, it's not something I usually go out of my way to do. Whenever I'm playing these games, I completely forget about the Chao Gardens if I'm honest. I don't feel like dedicating time to that stuff unless I motivate myself like I said before. I would like to see the Chao Garden return in future games if it's possible because I do think it's a neat idea. Something like a compatible app to go along with it would be pretty interesting. Kinda like those Tomodachi Life things that used to be everywhere when I was a kid. Sonic Adventure 2 was a better game than I've ever given it credit for. A very enjoyable story, fun gameplay, and presentation makes me understand why so many fans fell in love with this game when they were kids. Sonic Team were definitely going for something big for Sonic's 10th anniversary, and they did a good job. Another aspect that increases this game's replay value for me is the mods. Things like Better Tails mod, along with a bunch of skins and unique level ports, makes coming back to this game an enjoyable experience. Shout out to the Sonic modding community, by the way. From SA1 to SA2, Generations, Frontiers, and many other games, the modding community is cracked and they deserve a ton of support for the awesome stuff they come up with and restore to these games. For a very long time, I was a major contributor to the SA2 is bad train. Any criticism you could think of, whether they were legit or nasty, I've probably used them myself when sliding this game. I'm at a point now though where I want to enjoy things more earnestly, so allowing myself to highlight the positives of this game turned out to be beneficial because now I like Sonic Adventure 2 more than I did before. Sonic Adventure 1 is still better though. If you have any thoughts about Adventure 2, this is a safe space, so feel free to leave a comment. Shout out to you guys for watching, and check out my channel for more Sonic goodness, from theories to character discussions. With that, I'm gone. Peace.